Great. So as David said, today's talk is going to be on Gradio, the web framework for humans and machines. And in this talk, we're going to together, we're going to deconstruct what it means for a web framework to be for humans and machines. And the plan that I've set for us is going to be the following. So the first part of the talk is going to be like a brief high-level introduction to what MCP is and why it's important. MCP means Model Context Protocol, in case you haven't heard of that term before. The second part is going to be Gradio, and it's going to be like a brief introduction to Gradio and how it helps you build MCP servers. And the final part will be some cool demos of Gradio web apps that function as MCP web servers to kind of spark your imagination and sort of inspire you, or let you know what kind of cool things you can build with Gradio and its MCP integration. And then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So without further ado, what is MCP? And if you go to the MCP website, you see this diagram. And it might be a little bit confusing at first, but sort of the analogy that the community has sort of coalesced around is that MCP is the USB-C adapter for AI applications. So, in the case of the USB-C, it's this universal connector that will connect your phone to your laptop or your TV or your monitor or anything like that. And MCP is the same thing, but for AI applications. So you have on the right-hand side here, you have different data sources, different tools that you may want to connect an AI model to. So you could have a database, with all your customer data. You could have, some tools for accessing the web, and some tools like your Google Maps, Slack, anything like that. And via MCP, you can basically connect all of these different data sources and tools to a large language model. So that can be, something like Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, some of the open source models like DeepSeek. And then lo and behold, with this magical blue box in the middle, you've connected, a state-of-the-art LLM model with knowledge of your business or tools to give it abilities that it didn't have before. And it all happens in this blue box here called the MCP protocol. And the MCP protocol was started by Anthropic, and it's its own independent organization. So it's not controlled by any company, although it was created by Anthropic. So it's an open protocol, much like HTTP or something like that. So we can all build upon it and be safe that it's not going to change underneath us. Okay, so that is the brief high-level introduction of what MCP is. But why should you care, right? These models are so smart, where we keep hearing about how we're on the verge of AGI, and why do we need to connect the model to anything? Shouldn't it know everything already, right? And then, that's to illustrate the shortcoming of that line of reasoning. I want to, introduce you guys to the strawberry benchmark. I don't know if you've heard about this before, but it's kind of like a meme now. This might be a little bit small here, but I just, you can just ask any of these LLMs, how many R's are in a random word. So here I've typed out strawberry with 4 R's in the beginning and 4 R's at the end. And you can, it'll respond, right? But here it's just really wrong. It's saying that there's 7 R's in the word strawberry, right? And I think this is, this has been memed a lot, and so much so that I think the models have started to patch this, the model providers have started to patch the specific use case. But the fundamental problem here is that the models don't know everything, and in fact, they're not equipped with calculators. They can't really do physics or tax calculations or anything complicated with the given sort of text-only paradigm that they have, right? You can only send in text. So models can fail in really, really, surprising ways, right? This seems trivial to us humans. For, models, they get this wrong, right? So what can we do, right? Well, you can write a function or a bit of API that, lets models count arbitrary letters and words, right? So here, that's what we've done here. So the word is strawberry, the letter is R, and then lo and behold, we get the right result, 8, right? So we've written a little bit of logic that specifically handle this use case. And then magically, once you connect Claude or LLM or whichever large language model you want with this tool, with the MCP protocol, magically the model is able to get this right, because you ask it the question, and then the model's smart enough to know, like, oh, I have a tool that's specifically built for this use case. I'll just use that, and that's what's happening in this box here. And then it says, oh, there are 8 R's in the word strawberry. Right? So a little bit of like a silly contrived example, but I think it really illustrates, the shortcomings of where large language models are now and how MCP helps sort of fill in those gaps, overcome those shortcomings. And then, sort of on this very theme, right? Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, is on record saying that sort of the platonic ideal of the model that they're trying to build is a very tiny model with many tokens of context and access to every tool you can imagine. So basically, to break that down, like, they don't want to build a large language model that is sort of like a database of all of human knowledge, right? Because that's practically impossible, right? Like, and no matter how smart the model is, it'll never know the specificities of your business or your life or anything like that, right? It can't be like omniscient in that way. But what these models have started to show is that they're really good at reasoning, right? If you give them like a math problem and you say, like, here, you have a compass, a calculator, and some other things like that, like a straight edge or whatever, it can prove like these fundamental theorems of geometry, right? Even though it wasn't trained to specifically do that. And the reason that it's able to do that is because the model can reason and knows that, or it has a form of reasoning, right? Like, it knows that in order to answer the question, it can use these tools, and it can sort of evaluate the tool, look at the output, and then put that into another tool, and so on until it gets an answer, right? So this is sort of like where the field is going, right? The field is going in the way of models that are better and better at reasoning, and MCP servers to sort of give them access to all the data they need and all the tools they need to answer whatever question you throw at them. So that's where we're going. So it's important for us to like learn MCP now, right? Because it's going to be fundamental to where the field is going. Okay, so we've agreed that it's good to learn MCP to like implement our ideas with MCP, but how should we do that? So let's say that you have an idea, right? Like, you want to connect like your LLM to your calendar, right? So that it can book meetings for you, and like if someone sends you an email asking to meet at a certain time, the model can know, like, oh no, you can't meet at the time because you already have a booking at that time, or something like that. So you can take your idea and you can implement it on an MCP server, and that'll serve your LLM users, right? Like whatever LLM you want, right? But humans are still in the loop, right? Like, what if you want to know, like, you want to grant access to your other other people in your family, your other coworkers, like access to your like calendar, to see like how, what meetings you have, to see if they can book meetings for you, or like at a certain time or something like that. This MCP protocol is like not built for humans. It's like a machine protocol essentially, right? That you can call it yourself, like from a command line or something, but if you're like a not technical user, you're not going to be able to like access the data within the MCP server. So, if you want to like expose something to an LLM, it's going to be really hard for, the other humans in your organization to be able to audit this, to be able to try it out themselves, and to be able to see like, like what is actually, what data you have in this MCP, right? So like now we're like because of MCP, we're like in this paradigm where now we need to like build something unique for LLMs and something unique for humans, right? That's double the work, double the maintenance burden. And it's just more maintenance on you to like maintain these two separate paths together. Now, like, what if there was like, oh, sorry, getting ahead of myself. Beyond that, like MCP is like a new protocol, right? That comes with a lot of different nuances, right? Along like, how exactly should the data be sent over the internet, right? There's like these different like transfer protocols that you could use. How should you authenticate your MCP server, right? How do you like notify the people using your MCP server that the server is actually doing work and like getting close to giving the model the answer it needs? And how do you handle like cases where, your server is being accessed by a bunch of different LLMs, right? And like, how do you prevent it from crashing? How do you access files in this MCP server? Right? There's a bunch of other concerns that are not trivial to solve with MCP, right? So even if you wanted to just only build an MCP server, it's it's a lot of cognitive load on you to build these things. So even if you're an experienced programmer, there's a lot more sort of like cognitive overhead and stuff you need to learn before you build an MCP server. Okay, so Gradio is going to be the way that we sort of address this idea of like, can we just build one web server that works for both LLMs and humans, as well as coming with like the right set of batteries so that you don't really have to worry about authentication, concurrency, like progress notifications, like all these like things that are specific to the MCP protocol. Gradio can handle them for you. So you basically only have to worry about the exact logic that you want to expose. And Gradio will kind of handle everything else for you, right? So like the light bulb, your idea, that's basically the only thing you need to like implement and worry about. And then Gradio will handle the rest and make sure that it works for humans as well as machines or LLMs, right? Tying it back to the title of the talk, Gradio can serve both these kinds of users, LLMs and humans, at the same time. So let's see an example of that with our Strawberry sort of benchmark tool that I showed earlier, right? So earlier I showed an MCP server that can count, the letters in a given word, right? So Gradio, being an open source Python package, you basically implement all of the logic in Python, and then it'll create a web server for you that's also MCP compliant. So let's see a very simple example of that with our Strawberry letter counter example, right? So I'm importing the Gradio library, and then I am just over here. I don't know if you can see this little blue cursor thing, but I'm basically pointing at this letter counter function. It'll take two arguments, like the word and the letter, and then it'll just spit out how many times that letter appears in the word. And then what's very important here is that we've written a very detailed documentation in Python. This is called the doc string of what this function does, what it expects, and what it returns, right? So high level, we show that the whatever, it's counting the letters in a word, sort of beating a dead horse here, but these are the arguments, and it'll return the number of occurrences in that word. So that's like our function, right? Like going back to the previous diagram, like this is our light bulb, right? This is the tool we want to expose to our LLM and our user. So what we're going to do now is we're going to tell Gradio to turn this into a web server. So the easiest way to do that is to just define an interface. So the interface will take any Python function and then just turn it into a web server. So so it'll take, in this case, like two inputs, like the word and the letter, and it'll output a number. So that'll be like the count of the letter and the word. And then here we're just putting in the title, description, and then this is just like any normal Python script. So at the end, you call launch, and then you just run it with Python, right? And then what you'll see here is that you get two things. You get web UI for humans running at this URL, and then you also have an MCP server for free that's running at this URL. So, just to like summarize high level, what we've done is we've taken our idea, our light bulb, we've implemented it in a very simple Python function, and then we just basically, with one line of code, we just give it to Gradio and say like, hey, turn this into a web server for me. And Gradio will say, hey, no problem. And then with this MCP server equals true, Gradio will be like, okay, by the way, here's also your MCP server. So, this is like basically 10 lines of code, and, let's see what that can do in practice. So basically, if you go to the first URL, HTTP, this, 7860 URL, you get like a sleek UI, for free, right? That, your human collaborators can use. So if you wanted to expose, in this case, this like simple letter counter app, and you wanted to share with people so they can like debug it, see how it works, or just kind of try it out for themselves, they can do it really easily, right? And you can run this locally on your machine. You can host it anywhere on the cloud. And anyone can use this, right? And they can share the results. And they can basically, like, a lot of things that you would have to think you'd have to spend time on, like designing the UI, deploying the server. All these things are kind of handled for you with Gradio. So even if you're an experienced software engineer, this can save you a lot of time. So you get this very sleek UI for free, and then also you get the MCP server. So what I'm going to do now is taking that second URL for the MCP server, and I'm just going to connect it to this thing called the MCP inspector, which is like an open source tool for debugging MCP servers, right? So what I'm going to do is I just take that URL and I paste it into the box here, and then just click connect, and then you can show all the tools and stuff, and then you can try it out. And then you could also just like basically feed that URL to an LLM, right? As long as it supports the MCP protocol, and then it can sort of give you this. I did this with VS Code, right? This is basically the same idea, right? Or like it's the same. It's the LLM is using it as opposed to me using it with the MCP inspector. So you can use this in the wild as well. It's very easy. It's not just limited to this thing called the MCP inspector. Okay, so so here's a short demo. So basically, we've been talking a lot about counting letters and words. It's super easy, like who cares, right? So I've prepared a little demo here that shows like, where this can go, right? Because Gradio basically is built for building AI web applications. So if you have like any sort of like heavy AI workload, Gradio can handle all the traffic to that really well, and it can build you like a really performant web server, right? So where this can go is that you can use Gradio to expose like a very specific or a very like, sort of cutting edge AI functionality or tool. And then you can sort of wrap it into a web server that has that's MCP compliant. And then you can sort of pipe that into any LLM and do like really cool things. So basically in this demo, what's going to happen is that I've built a Gradio MCP server that uses this sort of cutting edge AI model for virtual try-on. So what it does is it takes a photo of like a piece of clothing, and it takes a photo of like a human model, and then it'll like sort of put the clothes on the human, right? So in this sort of video, what's going to happen is that I'm going to give Claude access to my web browser, access to this like virtual try-on tool, and I'm going to tell it like, hey, go to Uniqlo and just show me what I would look like with a bunch of different t-shirts. So all this powered, with like Gradio and open source AI. Yeah, so this is the model. This is called IDM VTON for virtual try-on. And I'm going to expose it in an MCP server with Gradio. Yeah. Anyway, so it's kind of like a cool example, like not something that obviously any of these LLMs can do out of the box. But if you can sort of, with Gradio, you can sort of be the bridge between like the LLM doing just like very simple like text-based tasks and doing like very cool generative AI things like, generating photos of you wearing different clothes from the internet, or generating videos, editing images, things like that. So basically, it kind of shows like the potential of where this can go, or like where you can take Gradio and its MCP integration. There's another example. So basically, what I'm doing here is like image editing. So I gave it the image of this little hugging emoji, huggy face here, and I told it to put it in like a 1980s or like in a disco background. And what you can see here is that the server is like You're getting all these like progress notifications. You're doing all these like cool things to let the user know like that the server is working. These are things that are like, kind of like not trivial to do by yourself, and Gradio handles them for you automatically. And then you get this cute little image at the end, right? So, once again, this is the sort of thing that, using Gradio, you can kind of connect these models to sort of cutting edge AI, these LLMs to cutting edge AI models that aren't just limited to text, and you can sort of like really supercharge the large language model to do things, that basically your imagination is the limit. And then basically, like, the cool thing about Gradio is that you get the cool UI for humans for free. So I'm showing the same thing, but in the web UI, right? So you can expose like basically the same logic, the same light bulb at the beginning of like, oh, I want an AI that can edit images. You can expose that for humans as well, right? So you can share this with your collaborators. Your friends can try out your model. It's not just limited to LLMs, right? So you basically build once and you can serve anyone. So that's kind of like where what's cool about Gradio is that you basically it really does lower the sort of the development burden on you, because you get all these like cool UI functionalities for free. Okay, so what is this? I don't know what this little sticky here is. Sorry. But basically, like, what next, right? Like, okay, so you've learned about Gradio, you've learned about MCP, like what steps can you do to start building with this, right? So the first step is like, don't build anything at all, right? The reason being is that Hugging Face is like the central repository of, it's one of the largest like MCP tool repositories like in the world, right? So basically you can go to any space on Hugging Face, a space, sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful, but spaces are like these sort of like web apps hosted on Hugging Face, and you can filter for web apps that are MCP compliant. And then you can basically just go to the documentation page at the bottom, and then you can copy and paste this URL. Let me see if I can get rid of the sticky so you can see it better, sorry. Okay, that should be better. So what I'm doing here is I'm filtering for MCP compatible, and then I'm basically, all those little like web apps you saw are MCP tools that you can use, out of the box, right? So here, this is a background removal web app that someone else wrote. Basically, I can just go to the API documentation page, copy and paste that URL into my VS Code, Claude Desktop, ChatGPT app, whatever you want. And then now, no matter what the LLM is, it can now remove backgrounds for images, like for free, by the way. So you don't have to pay for some other service or anything, right? So that's really cool, right? So like the first step, like you don't even have to build anything. Just like go to Hugging Face, see what's out there, and see if you can use it for your use case directly. Okay, let's say that you couldn't find the exact thing you were looking for, right? So now you have to build it. But let's say that you're not the best at Python yet, or you just don't, you want to get started without having to learn all the functionalities of Gradio, which it's easy to learn, but and basically now, like in the age of vibe coding, as they call it, why not start with that, right? So my colleague created this space on a Hugging Face called AnyCoder, and it lets you like vibe code essentially any Gradio app that's also an MCP server. So here, what I told it was build me a background removal app that supports MCP, and it spit out all the files within like less than a minute, right? So you can deploy this on your machine, or you could also publish it directly to Hugging Face, and then anyone can try it, right? So that's like the first step. Maybe you can get away with just vibe coding your MCP server for free. Because this application here is free. It just needs a Hugging Face account to access it, but Hugging Face accounts are free. And then the final thing you can do is, okay, like you've decided that you're going to start everything from scratch, but you can use the Hugging Face MCP server to kickstart your project. So the Hugging Face MCP server has knowledge of all the trending models on Hugging Face, all the trending data sets, all the trending spaces. So if you ask it a question, it'll give you like basically like, hey, like this is what the AI community thinks is the best model for this task, or like the best data set that has that data. So it's actually like very powerful. So here, what I've done is, I asked it like, what are some good AI models for background removal? And using the Hugging Face MCP server, it kind of searches a bunch of different models using different keywords, uses searches from some web apps, for some spaces as well. And it gives you like a really nice detailed report, like, hey, like look at this model. This is the link. Look, it's been downloaded almost 1 million times. These are the features. This is what you can use it for. And it gives you like a whole list. And here it kind of gives you like, hey, like based on, overall performance, I would really recommend this one, like, whatever, this one seems, better optimized, whatever. So it's actually like a really good report. So even if you've never used Hugging Face before, you're not an AI person, you're not like keeping up to date with like all the, all the developments, because like, really who can? There's so much cool stuff happening every day. You can use this server to sort of like kickstart your project and kind of point you where to look. So yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining my talk. Hope it was useful for you. And yeah, happy to do Q&A now, answer any questions you have.
We do have a few questions here in the Q&A. So the first one presented was, in a production setting, how would you decide whether to extend an LLM's capabilities through fine-tuning versus connecting external tools through a protocol like MCP?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that fine-tuning, I think, is definitely your last resort. Reason being that it's really hard. Like basically, like collecting the data is expensive, and it's a bottleneck, both in terms of like having the human resources to collect the data, clean it up, and stuff like that. And then also, there's like a bottleneck in the sense that now you need to train a model using this data, right? And it's very that in itself is like sort of an art. It can be expensive. Using these protocols like MCP, you can sort of bridge, you can taper over the knowledge gaps in an LLM basically like in less than an hour. And you can basically, in less than an hour, you can have a work in progress and you can start iterating from that. So definitely I would really recommend to start with MCP or like RAG, if you're familiar with RAG. Basically just look at these other sort of approaches before fine-tuning. Fine-tuning is really sort of like the last resort, and it kind of only works for very niche use cases in my experience.
Awesome. Next question is, what new evaluation metrics become important when models start using external tools beyond accuracy or latency?
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely LLM evaluation is a whole field onto its own, and I'm not super up to date with the latest standards. What I have seen though is that we're sort of moving beyond simple benchmarks of like, does it get this question right? And it's more like open-ended tasks. So there's this thing called like SWE bench, so short for software engineering benchmark. And it's basically like open-ended Python problems, and you give the LLM access to like a file directory, a Python interpreter, stuff like that, and you tell it to solve the problem, right? So it's kind of like approaching what a human developer would do, and you're sort of evaluating how good the model is at that, right? So, and then sort of from what I've seen, the field is kind of going in that direction, like sort of like more open-ended tasks that are somehow still easy to evaluate. But yeah, it definitely like, I can link some resources on that. We have a whole evaluation team at Hugging Face, so definitely it's non-trivial problem. But that's at a high level, I think that's sort of where the community is going.
So, and looks like we have maybe 3 quick ones as we close out. So if your team were adopting MCP or similar agentic protocols, what governance or standardization challenges would you anticipate across multiple business units?
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely, I'm not a expert on sort of like, yeah, like sort of like how this kind of plays into like a bigger IT department. Definitely, like, if you wanted to build in like access controls and like, some authentication, that's something that the MCP protocol itself supports natively. And it's also something that Gradio can handle for you very easily, right? So like you could enable users to like log in essentially before they use the MCP server. And depending on their credentials, you can kind of dictate whether or not, they have access to it or not, how much access they have, things like that. You can like protect these resources. So yeah, the tools are there. In terms of how it plays out in your specific organization, like I can't speak to that.
And then we have the interface seems like the entry point to Gradio. Can you show us how it looks for the t-shirt try-on and the emoji background example?
Yes. It's like I can maybe link that out just because I think it'll I won't have time to cover the entire implementation, but it's basically Gradio has like lower level sort of functionality beyond the interface. So you can kind of build more custom applications, that have multiple pages, multiple tabs, multiple, stuff like that. It's not just the interface. The interface is just, like you said, like the big entry point. And then like basically in that case, like the function would just be a little bit more complicated just because you're running an AI model. So you have to like make sure you download the model beforehand, all that stuff. I'll definitely link you the implementation. It's also it's on Hugging Face, so you can kind of read all the code there for yourself. And then if you have any follow-up questions, you can link to me.
Awesome. And get these last couple in before the next session starts at 11:15. So how does Gradio work under the hood?
Yeah, so that's a very broad question. Basically, like at a high level, like Gradio creates an asynchronous web server. So in our case, it's using Fast API. So if you're familiar with that, so it's basically creating a Fast API server under the hood. And then we have a bunch of pre-built front-end components and layouts that are created with Svelte. And then those are pre-compiled, and then the Python serves those Svelte components to you. So that's kind of like the one sentence summary. I'm sure you have follow-up questions, but yeah, in the interest of time, I don't think I can answer all of them.
That's a great condensed version. And finally, can I use Gradio along with N8N to build an agentic app with backend and front end?
Yes. So basically, yeah, we've seen that before, where you like have like an agent framework, and then basically you can still expose that through Gradio, because Gradio can basically just expose any Python function. So as long as you wrap your framework in a function that takes a certain thing and returns like something that Gradio knows how to handle, like text or a number or something like that, like a JSON blob, something like that, you can definitely do it. So yeah, it's possible.